Folks, we're going to get started. Thank you. Welcome to the library. I'm curious, first time in this library? Anybody? Show of hands? No? You've all been here before? Great. That's exciting. And thanks to the Boulder Bar Association for sponsoring this. It will be available on their YouTube channel. So if you're an attorney interested in learning more, or anybody, I guess, but there are some continuing education credits available as well. I'm Sam Fuqua. While I am an advocate for the library district, my role today is just to moderate and keep the conversation going. I think since we have a small group, well, for one, I would encourage folks to move up if you're comfortable with that, but I also thought we could go around and just introduce ourselves. Hi.
Hi, I'm Anna Rowley. I just heard about this today. Hi.
My name is Maki Iatridis. I'm a lawyer and I'm part of the Champions group, I guess, and I help try to put this together.
And I'm Johnny Teeter. I'm a former lawyer and also part of the Champions group. So.
Still a lawyer.
No.
There's no such thing as a former lawyer.
Nice try. Lawyer was recovering lawyer.
Yeah.
I'm Doug Hamilton. I'm part of the campaign with Johnny, and also a lawyer here in town.
I'm Claire Kelly. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm a library student and a Boulder Library champion.
I'm Gene Hayworth. I'm a retired librarian from the city of Boulder as of the end of last year, and I have a little bookstore in Colorado.
Congratulations.
Hi, I'm Prudence Carter. I'm neither a student, a lawyer, or a librarian. And I'm from Longmont. And we have a district task force looking at forming a district in Longmont.
So I am Mark Springfield. I am also from Longmont, and we're also trying to learn everything we can about campus.
Same thing, Scott Converse, Longmont Library District Group, and we're watching to learn and try to avoid falls that we know Johnny and Brute have hit over the years. So we're learning a lot.
Great.
Hopefully only our successes.
That's what we're going to accomplish.
Hi everyone, I'm Beth Dower. I am a library attorney and I work with Kim Seter. I'm happy to be here today.
Con Kruger, I'm a lawyer. I work with Kim and Beth.
Paul Harstead. I'm a non-practicing lawyer, but I do political polling and campaign strategy, and have had the pleasure of working with library districts in Colorado, Iowa, Montana, and Washington State.
Well, welcome everybody. Before we start the discussion, panelists, do you want to give brief introductions to yourselves? Gentleman to my right here who had the longest commute.
Yeah,
Upstairs. Yeah.
my name's David Farnan. I'm the library director for the city of Boulder.
I'm Kim Seter. I have a firm in Greenwood Village called Seter Vander Wall that these two are in. And we do a lot of library law formations and representing them. Believe it or not, they have a lot of litigation too.
And I'm Janet Michels. I'm with the City of Boulder City Attorney's Office, and I've been supporting the library in all of their legal work. And this is one piece of the legal work that we are supporting Library and City Council with.
Well, we want to have a lot of back and forth with everybody in attendance, but to start, I have a few just introductory questions that we'll ask each panelist. So, David, let's start with you. Give us a kind of a snapshot of the current state of the library and why the library district proposal is in play here.
Current state of the libraries, we're on the way back from the pandemic recovery. So, as with a lot of city services, there were pretty dramatic budget cuts, and the library was recipient of some of those cuts. I think we cut, I don't remember the exact figure, it was about 17% of our overall budget, so roughly $1.7, $1.8 million. Some of that funding was restored in January 2022, and we've reopened 4 of our buildings. Main Library, Meadows, George Reynolds, and the Novo Corner Library are all open to the public on reduced hours. We're hopeful that in 2023 we'll see further recovery and recoup the rest of the money that we lost due to budget cuts in the pandemic. The arrival at how we got here to the district discussion, it's been a long slog, right? So, I mean, I have notes of minutes from county discussions from 1987 on this very topic. So it's been going on for quite some time. The most recent discussion began in earnest, I think in 2017 in the course of the master plan. So every 10 years, library departments, city departments do master plans. We began ours in 2017, and in the course of that, we thought of the novel idea of not just coming up with what the community said they wanted the library to do, but how would we pay for it? And that had been a task of mine when I first took the job in 2013. The city manager's office, my boss, wanted to know if we would look at pursuing other sources of revenue for how to run the library. And so, that was just one in the course of things with the district. But in the course of the time during the master plan, the Library Commission by 2018 had arrived at the conclusion that a library district, while it's the most common form of governance of public libraries in the state of Colorado, was also the most, they determined, the most fair and equitable way of funding, sustainably funding the Boulder Public Library. And they unanimously agreed on that and put that into that master plan report. And so since that time, we've done a lot more research. We had done quite a lot of research prior to that. We've done a deep dive in terms of financial analysis. We've done a lot of legal analysis. We've convened working groups. We've done polls. We've done, you name it. I asked my admin on Monday, just can you go back and see how many times I've been in front of city council on this issue since 2018? And so she ran the report. It's like 15 times. So we have been talking about it quite at length for the past 4 years. And so we've arrived now at this point where, in short order, council and the county commissioners will be discussing the possibility of formation of a library district by resolution at their April council and county commissioner.
Thanks. Janet Michels, can you follow up on that with some overview of what the legal steps have looked like to get us to this point and what the next steps are?
Yeah, sure. We've had a lot of, as David said, a lot of meetings with our city council and have received direction from them in preparing and knowing that this is something that we're going to have to figure out. We've been working on a draft intergovernmental agreement, and I think Kim will explain a little bit more when he's talking about the formation of library districts and what the state library law requires. But one thing is an intergovernmental agreement between what they call the establishing entities, which are the governments that are within the district. In our case, it's Boulder County and the Boulder City Council. And then if a library district is formed, then a board of trustees will be appointed, and that board of trustees also participates in the negotiation of this intergovernmental agreement. And like I said, some requirements are statutory, but a lot of conditions are negotiated. So part of our task has been, as a staff, has been analyzing those negotiable terms and what that might look like, what the separation of the library from city services might look like. It's very complicated, as you might imagine. We've got personnel issues, contract issues, land issues. The Boulder Public Library owns 4 different facilities, one of which is this beautiful main library. The main library sits on a municipal campus. It's not on a parcel of its own. And so one of the things that we have to figure out is how do we separate, if the library district is formed and this building is under the control, then will it be by a lease, or will we deed it to the library district? Will it be just the building? Will it be the building and surrounding land? So we've been analyzing those kinds of issues. And of course, we've been preparing the necessary documents, drafting resolutions, drafting the intergovernmental agreement. We've had public notices that have had to go out by statute. And it's, the good news is there's a fairly good cookbook for how districts are formed. And the even better news is that we were able to retain the services of Kim Seter and his firm to assist in the process. So it's been we feel like we've got a lot of expertise on our side.
Thanks, Janet. Seter, is it fair to say that library districts are the norm in Colorado?
Yeah, I think they are, and more so every year. We have a lot of municipal libraries that are now at least looking at converting to a library district because of the stability of the funding and a better governance model. So I think right now we have at least 4 that are seriously heading that direction. You also have Boulder and even Denver heading that direction. So we'll see if they get there, but it's a very lengthy and difficult process sometimes. And you can tell from what Janet just said, you know, we're asking a city to give up possibly some property and some power. And we did have one Board of County Commissioners say, why would we give up the best thing we do? And they didn't. So, but yeah, it'll over the years, it's going to become by far the normal process.
And the separation issues that Janet just outlined, are those the typical issues in the creation of a district?
Yes, so there are a couple of ways to form the district itself, but once it's formed, think about forming an entity that has nothing. It's an empty shell, and now you've got to fill it with something. There's 2 ways to do that. It gets its money and it builds its own libraries, or more often, in fact almost always, it's formed by these establishing entities, and then the establishing entity works with that new entity to take in the library, take in the books, take in all of the facilities. That process includes working through this IGA to come up with funding, where maybe the city shares in the funding, or maybe there's just a mill levy for the library itself. How do you transfer over books? How do you transfer over buildings? How do you transfer over employees? This library has fabulous employees that are providing services, and you don't want to lose them. So we've developed ways to make offers to them to become part of the library district. That all has to happen before the library district has the buildings and the property. And the ultimate goal is everything just transfers over from the outside. It doesn't look any different, but the governance model and the funding model has changed.
A personnel question, if a library employee said, I don't want to be part of this new district, I want to keep working for the city, what happens then?
Yep. So far, the ones we've done, the city will let them know that their job is going away because they work for the city library, and at the same time, the library district makes them an offer. So they can continue in the exact same position they're in, except now under a different governance model, or ask the city for a different job at that point.
So I've heard about special districts, sanitation district for an area, or a subdivision forms a special district. There was a big investigative series in the Post a while back about that, and seemed to be focused on a lack of transparency. How are those entities different from a library district, or are they?
Yeah. They're actually very different. Library districts are formed under one statute, 2490-101. Special districts are formed under Title 32. So 32, 101 is where they begin. So the governance model in the statutes is completely different. Special districts are used to finance usually new infrastructure for new communities, where a library district is a single purpose entity. Its only purpose is to provide library services and library facilities. And those services and facilities, as you know, as library patrons, are expanding all the time necessarily, but the only purpose of that entity is to finance and operate those library facilities. They also differ in the way the board controls the district. So a Title 32 district will usually be formed before there's any houses or anything else on the property by a developer who's going to use that to put in infrastructure. So the district board is the developer's employees. In a library district, the directors of the board, they're called trustees, are appointed by the establishing entities that Janet talked about that create the library district in the first place. We get a lot of questions from people who are concerned that library trustees are not elected. And we've had 3 or 4 attempts through the legislature to change that, to make them elected. But the argument back is that a library is a very special kind of entity and being in that it's protecting all of our First Amendment rights, our right to information, our right to argue with one another, our right to disagree. So the notion of having your trustees appointed comes from the idea of protecting that power, to make sure that some political party doesn't take over the board of trustees and your library becomes a political entity. We can argue and talk about whether it works. So far it has, as far as I can tell. But that's the theory about this different kind of governance structure, where in Title 32, you're electing directors who are just like the trustees, except that they have to be elected from the people within the district. They're not appointed because they have a special interest in the purpose. They're appointed, they're elected in a political process. And the only people living in the district at the time are the developers' people. Very different with the library district. Then once the library district is formed, there's also a different governance model in that the trustees are essentially charged with setting policy. And then you have people like David, who are the executive directors who implement the policy, rather than dealing directly with employees and construction and all those other things. So you have library professionals in charge of those areas, and then the library trustees are people who are appointed specifically because they love libraries.
Thank you for that. Is there a mechanism for removal of a trustee? And has that ever happened in Colorado, and what were the circumstances?
Yeah, there is a mechanism. The statute says that trustees can be removed for cause as defined in the bylaws of the Board of Trustees. We did have a case in Weld County where several municipalities removed the Board of Trustees and replaced the board with people from their own city councils. And there was litigation. We ended up representing the Colorado Association of Libraries in the Court of Appeals that finally established that a library trustee can be removed for cause, but for cause is defined by the state of Colorado and the case law. So it becomes things like financial malfeasance, dishonesty, committing a crime, embezzlement, plus the few things that end up in the trustees' bylaws, which are typically, if you miss 3 meetings without an excuse, you're out.
So in the Weld County case, was that removal reversed? Reversed, yes, okay. Yep. Any other key points we need to put out there in terms of the legal aspects of creating a district?
There's a difference. So the current library here is a city library. What you're hopefully moving to is a library district. Different governance model in that the library would move out of the city. It would become what's called a quasi-municipal corporation and political subdivision of the state of Colorado. Quasi-municipal meaning it has its own funding sources and it controls its own municipal functions. So the Board of Trustees becomes almost like a city council. But again, it only has one purpose, and that is the library. So all of the policies and things are within the library itself. And it's a political subdivision of the state of Colorado, which means it's no longer subject to the city ordinances and the city resolutions. Rather, it's subject to Colorado law, which is 2490-101, the library law. So it becomes a standalone entity, supports itself, versus being part of the city, having to be part of the city's financial position. And I can't remember what the question was now. I don't know if I answered it.
Oh, no, I think you're answering. I just wondered, is there anything we missed that's key to the...
Oh, yeah. And that's important because ultimately the reason there's such an expansion in the number of library districts is because when you become that separate governing entity, the city of Boulder's built a beautiful library and a beautiful library system, but this library system is always struggling with potholes and sewer mains and paving streets. And of course, it's really easy to say, the library's fine, let's take money from there, use it somewhere else. Not saying Boulder's been doing that, but typically that's what happens. So you'll see a lot of city libraries have 1 year their finances are down here, the next year they're up here, then they're down here for a while, and then they're up here, and there's no way to plan. So if you're going to build a new library, you have to be able to save money and plan ahead. In the city structure in the state of Colorado, that funding that's given to the library is to be used, and if it's not, it goes back into the city's coffers. And then you have to go through that process again. With the library district has its own funding. If it gets excess revenues within the bounds of the Tabor Amendment, it can maintain those revenues for future projects, plan ahead, and operate the library in a much more efficient manner.
Have there been any issues related to taxation and the funding model? Voters approve the district, they approve a certain mill rate for their property taxes, and
yeah, it's been, I've been doing libraries for 35 plus years, and the model has just worked beautifully. Libraries are loved and well respected, so getting a mill levy is usually, not always approved, but as long as the library is being reasonable, it gets approved. The only thing I can think of that we've run into just recently is some of our libraries, the taxes in the area they're in are heavily reliant on oil and gas. And when that goes down, it takes everything with it. So we've got some struggles in the southwest quarter of the state right now where revenues just dove. And I was talking to somebody earlier and said, but who knows, with Russia and Ukraine tomorrow, they might be right back on top again. But we're trying to find ways to buffer that problem, and we'll see. And of course, it's not just a problem for the library districts. It's also a problem for the municipalities and the water and sewer districts. And being too reliant on something like that is problematic.
David or Janet, anything to respond or add to Kim's comments before we open up the floor?
Well, sure, yeah, and I was thinking just especially for our friends in Longmont, there are two ways that a library district can be formed under the Colorado Library Law, and one is by petition, and then the other is by resolution. In the petition process, an advocacy group would circulate petitions to have the question whether to form the district put on the ballot. And the library law has a real low bar, it's 100 signatures to get a measure on the ballot whether to form the district. At that time, if they do, if a petition is circulated, any government that has a library within the proposed district can opt out of it, out of the library district entirely. That didn't happen in our case. There was a petition circulated by advocates in 2019. They did gather sufficient signatures to have the question whether the library district should be formed put on the ballot, but that was pulled with the agreement that City Council would take a deeper dive into the funding for the library and what it requires to get it to the funding level that the community is desiring. Ultimately, after a lot of analysis, our city council in May of 2021 directed staff to do the work of looking into forming the library district by resolution. So what that looks like is that the Boulder City Council and the Boulder County Board of County Commissioners would both have to adopt resolutions approving the formation or forming the district. And then if that happens, if they're both adopted, then there's a process by which trustees, the initial board of trustees are appointed, and the trustees then speak on behalf of the library district that's been adopted, and then it's the trustees and those entities, the county and the city and the trustees that then negotiate the intergovernmental agreement that talks about how services will be provided and who is responsible for what and that type of thing. But at the same time, there has to be funding. So the library district still has to put a funding measure, a Tabor measure on the ballot. And the way that we are proceeding in Boulder right now is this, we're going to actually have the City Council and Board of County Commissioners have a joint meeting on April 5th. It's a public hearing that's required by Colorado Library law. They will take comment from the public, and then they will, what will happen is that the Boulder City Council then will decide whether to adopt this resolution to form the library district. Boulder County Commissioners will hear this comment, and I believe they're doing some other outreach as well. They're going to go back to their own meeting a couple days later on April 7th, and then the Boulder County Commissioners will vote whether to adopt the resolution to form the district. And if the district is formed, then we get into the IGA, and the library district puts the Tabor measure on. They're looking at 2022 for the Tabor measure to fund the library district.
And the county commissioners are taking public comment now. They have a town hall, a virtual town hall meeting scheduled for tomorrow.
Just a question. There's some folks from Longmont here, and we're talking about the Boulder County Commissioners. And I see the line of the proposed district is not going into Longmont, so it sounds like the county commissioners, Boulder County Commissioners would have to chime in on the Longmont district too, if that gets proposed. And then it's two county commissioners?
If
two sets of counties?
If the boundaries go outside of Longmont, then you would have to have the county involved. If you keep it within Longmont, the Longmont couldn't form it.
So only the city council could create a resolution for Longmont city limits.
Yes.
If you go outside of the city limits, you need the county commissioners. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I think we're in the question period. Yes, I'll try to monitor the hand. No, that's fine, yeah. Doug?
I guess on the appointment, now you said that, I believe, and I just want to make sure I was correct, that the Colorado Library law requires appointment and not election. So there's no mechanism within the Colorado Library law for election of board trustees.
No. Yeah, and as I said, it has become an issue a couple of times, and the legislature has looked at it, and it's never come out of committee.
Okay. The other question is, and you said if the opposite happens, let's say the county rejects the proposal, and it's on the ballot, what did you say about an opt-out provision? I wanted to catch that.
That we'd have to unwind that a little bit. If the city council adopts a resolution to form the district, and the county does not, then we're kind of back at the very beginning. We kind of go back to square one. The petitioners have gathered petitions, and it could be put on, the question of formation could then be put on the ballot. The question of formation. They, at the same time, have a measure to fund the district. And you could have language in the funding measure that said the funding will only happen if the district is formed. So you wouldn't end up with a situation where there might be funding approved, but not the formation of the district itself. Does that answer your question?
No, I think I thought I heard you say there was an opt-out. Like if you were performing by petition instead of resolution, that there was an opt-out thing. I was just trying to understand what you meant there.
Yeah, I missed that part. It's a little piece in there. So if the petition is circulated again, if the advocates wish to have a district formed, the city would have the opportunity at that time to opt out. There are sometimes signatures involved, time structures involved, but the city would have an opportunity to say, you know, after all, we don't want to. And it would be a resolution by the city council. It would be a decision made by the city council.
Okay, sorry, I thought you said like voting districts could do it. Sorry.
Yeah, it's any municipality that has a library of its own can opt out.
Okay, get it.
And we actually had some litigation on this too, because we had a couple of cities up north that wanted to opt out. I forget how that worked. They were trying to opt out as they were annexed, and we ended up in court, and the Court of Appeals said, no, you opt out on day one or you're in. That's it. So that's pretty much laid out law too. So it's a one-time opportunity to get out if you're providing library services already in your community.
So I think I saw a gentleman in the blue shirt first, and then with the other question. Yeah, you.
I guess I'm hoping for a little bit of clarification about the explanation of the benefit of appointment versus election. My understanding is that you said that takes that out of the political process. But aren't the board and trustees being appointed by political bodies?
Yes. As I said, we can argue about it. I don't know. I don't have strong feelings about it, but that is the argument that wins the day. And it seems to be true. From my experience, you get people appointed who are interested in libraries, and they're not there to build a resume to become the mayor or something else. So far, we've had a few that I would say were not the best, but generally speaking, you end up with library advocates.
This gentleman here, you got your hand up?
Yep. Also along the same lines there, if you do go the route of a petition versus a resolution, who appoints the trustees?
They would still be appointed by so you have to give your petition to somebody. That's who's going to appoint the trustees.
Who do you give it to?
In your case, it would be the city.
So the city still appoints the trustees no matter what?
Yeah.
Unless you extend it out beyond the boundary of Longmont, then the county would also set.
And the petition would not be to form the library district. The petition would be to put the question on the ballot. So, and we always discourage that process. It's a great process, but the concern is, okay, so you give the city the petition. They say, okay, we'll put it on the ballot. It's on the ballot. People vote yes. Now you have a library district. So what? The city still has the library. So at some point, you have to have this IGA entered into. And to me, it's very difficult to go to the voters and say, approve this library district. And they're going to say, what are we going to get for it? And you say, oh, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. It's much better if you have a city that works with you like Boulder, and you get that IGA together, and then they form by resolution. Now you go to the ballot saying, here's what's going to happen if you vote yes.
I'm guessing there's some history here, and I heard you guys did a petition first, and the city was not necessarily on board with the library district. When I look at the history, then they did a petition, and then the city got on board with the library district. Is there a correlation between those things?
Well, Janet, do you have any comment on that?
Well, she got really silent and still.
I don't know necessarily that there's like a political history. The library commissioners, when the master plan was adopted, did recommend the formation of a district. And I would say it took some time to really pick up some steam. Right, and I think that by the advocates circulating the petition, that really took it up another notch, because then we had to make some choices. We had to decide, city council had to decide whether they would opt out or if they would want it to be put on the ballot, the question of whether to form the district be put on the ballot, or whether they would form it by resolution. So after a lot of analysis, what they decided to do was a study to whether to have it as a resolution. So I would say that the petition circulation definitely
Focus the council.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and,
focus the council.
and I think city councils change, and members go off, new members come on who may have different views. Yeah.
So I want to follow up on a prior question and then ask Kim a question or two. The issue of appointing versus electing library trustees, I guess I'd kind of side with Kim on this. If all one has to do is look at school boards nationwide lately to see the turmoil, the polarization, the controversies, what's happening to them, and tearing them apart, and in turn citizenry. And to try to envision that happening to library boards and then devolving into arguments about banning books and critical race theory and that sort of thing, it sounds like an unappealing prospect. Two quick questions, Kim. One, have you ever, I'll just do the one first. Have you ever heard of a district being approved and the funding being denied in Colorado or elsewhere? And then is it just a shell that is inoperative?
Yes, and it has happened. It happened in Berthoud. The Berthoud questions, fortunately the Berthoud questions they were asked in a way that they were supposed to say, if the library district is not approved, then the tax question doesn't matter. They were turned around, and when the question was, everything was declined, well, the formation one ultimately won in our interpretation of it. So what we did is we took the library district and went after another mill levy the next year, and it passed.
I see, okay.
So they've been a district for 6, 7 years, 8 years. But yeah, it's happened.
Great. And then the other question is, so just the case of Boulder City, if the district's approved and the mill levy is approved to operate the district, it happily in my view, but it's a windfall of revenue, is it not, for the city? If they spend $8 million for $10 million for the library, and the mill levy is approved for the new library district, that money just returns to the city, you know, for them to do as they please without any Tabor implications. Is that accurate?
Yeah, theoretically, I don't know if I'd call it a windfall, but they should have more money.
Right.
And then as part of the campaign process for the mill levy, that usually becomes an issue that needs to be discussed by everyone, the city, the library.
Yeah. Okay, maybe bonus is a better word than windfall.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think, Jenna, correct me if I'm wrong, but the city has begun or had initial discussions about a process to prioritize that freed up money should the district pass.
They're having a concurrent conversation, city council, what would happen to the funding if the library is no longer funded through the general fund, then how will that money be allocated? So that is a parallel process with the formation question.
A quick follow-up, David. I haven't looked at the map, but can you describe the district? It excludes Longmont, excludes Louisville.
Yeah, the map's gone through a lot of permutations, and it's a draft still, right? Until the city council and the county commissioners weigh in on it and ask for borders to be altered. We've been working on it now for a long time. So the initial map that was proposed was the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan, which is essentially based on a map that's 50 or 60 years old in Boulder County. Each municipality has an area of influence. And so the map was intentionally designed not to impede upon any other district or area of influence of another municipality. It's since expanded, but we've kept those two basic principles in play. It doesn't impede upon any other municipality. It doesn't impede upon any of those municipalities' areas of influence. It does pick up areas outside, beyond the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan, and that happened discussions, I should say, with City Council and with the County Commissioners. So We went to city council, they said, would you include some of the mountains? There's a lot of library users there, because we also track where library card holders are. So we showed them that map and they said, could you include part of the mountains? We went to the county commissioners and the county commissioners indicated to others, like, would you include Niwot? Would you include this area? Would you include that area? Up to Altona North. And so all of those areas were reflected in the map. It recently then went to the Library District Advisory Committee, which was a council-appointed committee of residents that included city residents and non-city residents. And they also revised the map a little bit further by putting in some criterion, I think 7 different criterion that they would like the map to adhere to. So tries to follow precinct lines. It's at this point it's contracting, and so it's contracted a little bit further from the library district.
But no other jurisdiction, modest, small town, whatever, has said, "Oh, won't you include it?" Like Lyon, I don't know anything about Lyons.
Alliance has their own library district, as does Netherland.
And
Netherland has a library district.
They've not opted. They prefer not to.
No, we had conversations more or less at the library level, and so there was no one expressed interest at that time. That's back in 2018 when the initial conversations were going. But we talked to the libraries in Louisville, Lafayette, and Longmont, and at that time there was no interest in 2018. But that could change over the course of time. Superior was a question mark all along the way, but Superior City currently pays a small stipend, or a stipend, I don't know how small, to the city of Lafayette for library services.
Yes. I have a question actually for Janet or Kim. I think if the district, assuming it goes to a vote in November and it doesn't pass, it can be tried again, but only 2 more times? Or how does that work?
That is yet to be determined.
Okay.
The way that we drafted just an initial intergovernmental agreement was that the district could put on a measure for 3 consecutive years, and if the Tabor measure didn't pass, then the library district would be dissolved. But that's completely negotiable. It could be, if the district doesn't receive funding through their Tabor measure by X date, then it will dissolve. Or it could be, if you don't get your funding in this 22 measure, then it will dissolve. That's one of the things that City Council and the Board of County Commissioners have to decide.
Still being negotiated.
And City Council will discuss on March 15th. It's in their agenda. I think we turned in the packet yesterday or this morning?
This morning.
Yeah, so the packet this morning recommends, rather than 3 consecutive elections, it recommends, the staff recommendation is that they establish a date, whatever that date is, and then it would be up to, it's a little bit more flexible, and it would allow for the District Board of Trustees to decide how they wanted to approach elections. They could run another election, or they could choose to skip a year or do that, depending upon what the date is.
And Kim, have you seen that kind of structure?
Yeah.
Yeah, Claire?
So I'm a library master's student, and I'm studying a question, what are the benefits of library districts for certain segments of the population in the community? So for example, I'm trying to tease out how would that impact families or students or elderly or immigrant populations. And I suppose it all comes down to more funding, but I've been kind of latched on to this point that I heard, there's 56 library districts in Colorado. I didn't realize there were so many, so that's how we're able to say it's the most common structure in Colorado. And you've been involved, Kim, with forming all of them, I believe?
Not all of them.
Not all of them, most of them. Okay, so I'm just curious to know, we're at the initial stages here. As somebody who's seen municipalities come through that process and be on the other side, are there any examples that you can point to about how communities have benefited with the library district or done innovative and interesting things that serve their communities?
It sounds like a question for you to start.
Yeah.
I'll just start by saying they do end up with a lot more money, and it's more stable, so that the planning can be done by David's people.
I think that's the key thing, really, Claire, is this. It's not more funding necessarily; it's the stability.
Okay.
And that's what we see. So, for instance, in a municipal library, and I've worked in both. I've also worked in a county library. They all vary. The dependence on sales tax is a risky spot to be. And so the Boulder Public Library depends to a certain extent on sales tax. And so not judgment, but the way it works is the pandemic lands. That was, we knew kind of about it in January. Things closed in March. Before April, I had a directive to cut a certain percentage of my budget. We turned that in within a week. And by May, $1.7 million that we previously had was no longer in the budget. Right, so that is just the reality of working in a municipal library which is dependent upon sales tax. Sales tax projections were really very poor at the time. And that, as Kim sort of described, that is episodic throughout the economy. You see in a recession, people stop spending money. That has a direct impact on how a city operates, and a city has to make cuts. In the case of a pandemic, I don't blame anyone. It was not within our control. And, especially in emergency situations, we are all sitting in a room and everybody clearly understands that there is not the ability for us to cut safety. Public safety is not a place where, in the case of a pandemic, it's probably a pretty bad idea to cut public safety. So then what are the options that you have within the general fund? That is the library. I know from the district libraries that I've worked in and the ones that I witnessed around us, they made no cuts. They did not have to make that projection because while the pandemic may have an effect on housing costs and property values, in the long run, those reevaluations of the property won't actually land for 2 years. And so they would have a 2-year window. And I've worked in districts where that window was predictable. We knew in 2006 that there was going to be a dip in property values in Colorado. We didn't know, or in 2008, we didn't know how much. But you begin to plan, right? So that's the key, right? Planning. So you begin to plan, if we lose half of our revenue by 2010, what does the library look like? And you can begin to kind of set the plan in place. Whereas for where the effects are immediate, like in a municipal library and most recently in the pandemic, I don't blame anyone. I feel like we did our jobs well, but we had clear instructions and we knew we had to make immediate cuts. And that's a hard thing to do for anybody. I think it aged me at least a decade in that 2 months because I realized I had to let go of a lot of people.
Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I wonder if I get a comment on the prevalence of hybrid models. My definition of a hybrid would be a library district that might contract administrative services back from the city, and whether that's been considered a successful strategy going forward for communities that are adopting a library district but don't want to jump in all the way.
The first model we did based upon that shared services was Fort Collins. And that model has persisted there for a lot of their services. So when we did the IGA, we set it up thinking the first couple of years the district needs that help from the city with HR and payroll and procurement for construction and all of those things. So we built that into the IGA that for a per hour fee, the library district would buy services from the city. And they stuck with it for a long time, most of the services. It was only a couple of years ago that they got their own HR person, and they still use the city's training, they still use the city's construction management, and then pay the city for it. So there's a benefit to the city, there's a benefit to the library district, and like I say, in Fort Collins it's persisted. In Adams County, we did the same thing, and the library district moved away from the county a little quicker, but it was, I don't know if it wasn't based on the economics of it, it was based on the desire to really grab hold and drive the library in its own direction.
Was that Anythink Library?
Yes, yeah.
So it's more district-driven process once it's established as to how long that would keep that relationship going.
Yeah, and the IGAs we've done so far have, either side can opt out by giving the other side enough notice that they can get their own, whatever it is. But it doesn't have to be. Again, that's part of the intergovernmental agreement. At what point in our process would that be negotiated then? After the district?
After the district is formed and in the negotiation of the intergovernmental agreement. And what we're currently considering is the city continuing to provide city services to the district after it's formed for 1 year, following the Tabor measure, a successful Tabor measure. But the library district would then have to pay the city back for those services. And staff's recommendation is to cut the services to have the library district be its own entity without being connected to the city library, to the city of Boulder to the extent that we can. Whether that's the direction we'll get from council remains to be seen, but that's our recommendation.
And the reasoning for that on the city's part is it's just cleaner, or
that is one, yeah. It's complicated to split it, but the district, and David can probably speak to this a little bit more, but the district, you would assume, wants to be its own entity, and it wants to have full control of its operations, and contracting back to the city for services. They might be able to get the services that the city would provide for a lot less than what the city would charge them. But I'll pass it over to David for some of those other considerations.
Yeah, there are a couple of things. So the city staff, and there's a large city staff that works on this. It's not my determination. It's a large city staff. They elected for doing the cleanest, most efficient separation as possible. One of the complications there is more than half of the library staff here at Boulder Public Library are part of a collective bargaining unit, and so they are a union. And the city was clear from the beginning that they would not be willing to negotiate collective bargaining with union employees who were represented and paid for by another entity. And so that was one of the impetus. So the staff would have to shift over. At some point, there has to be a date at which they would shift over, and the employees would have to choose if they wanted to belong to another collective bargaining agreement or not, because they would no longer be able to belong to the municipal employees union. So that was one of the big ones. It gets a little complicated with regard to some of the areas. Most of the things like HR, finance, you can find an HRIS system, you can hire an HR professional. You can stand up a program relatively soon. Businesses start up all the time. Most of the software and the IT infrastructure that we use is readily available to any consumer, and so they felt like, okay, yes, there are some elements here, but depending upon what you want to use for software, you can easily go out and start a business, contract with all these services, and they're mostly in the cloud these days, so it's not like buying a lot of infrastructure. You basically contract with Microsoft or Google or somebody like that, and you have all of your software. Where it does get a little complicated in the infrastructure is that the city of Boulder is on a fiber network, so we are connected to the federal labs. This building is a connectivity site and actually is a feeder to other city locations, and so that's a contract that will have to be worked out. A library district, should it happen, would probably have to become a member of that collective on the fiber network, and then we'll have to work out some deal wherein the connectivity that this building provides to other city services would have to be accommodated. But most everything seems relatively severable. One of the points which in all the negotiations, we have old buildings. We have very old buildings in Boulder. This one is the newest one, I think was built in 1992. And they run a lot of them on unique systems or older systems. And the one place where there's an exception to that clean sever is that there is an understanding that in all likelihood a library district would want to contract back with the city for facilities maintenance, at least for a period of time, until such time as new technicians could be brought on to actually maintain, boilers that are 60 years old and require a level of maintenance which is pretty detailed, and it's as much art as it is science. So that's something that I think the only service that the IGA stipulates that there may be a longer term relationship on. Everything else, we've been working internally within the city to see what would take to sever those things and pull them up to speed, so that within that, after the 1 year transition, there's a date, January 1st, whatever, 2024 or 2025, everything flips over, and then it's the district is running on its own.
This gentleman back here.
So my understanding is it's easier to merge library districts than to separate them. So the law is written in a way that it's if you wanted to take two existing districts, you could merge them fairly easily. Is that true?
We have not done that.
But I read the law and it says that it kind of encourages it, actually. It seems to be written that way, but you've said no one's ever done it.
No, we have an inquiry from the southwest corner of the state right now to do that, but it hasn't gone anywhere yet. So how easy that is, I don't know.
I asked because David said that he had talked to Longmont in 2018 and there was no interest. And I know the woman who was not interested just retired. So I would like to have that discussion with someone.
Interesting.
Look, this.
Kim, well, for David, quickly, what election are you aiming toward? Which?
We don't know. I mean, that'll be dependent upon what city council decides to do. I think right now the assumption is that the advocates and city council are leaning towards 2022.
This November?
Yes.
Right. And Kim, I presume the statute lays out which elections are open to such a, petition or a resolution.
Yeah.
What can you do it in a primary election? Can you do it in a special election?
They're all Novembers now, right, Beth? Yeah. So
Odd years or even?
Every November.
And yes, ma'am?
I have a question, it's more of an HR question. So what happens with their pensions? Because pensions, are a big deal.
Yep.
Are they rolled over to the district and then the district manages? Because you would have to have reserves for that.
Yeah, that's a great question. You call para and you discuss with para how that transition would occur. They've done it in a number of occasions. So yes, the pensions would transfer to the responsibility of a new entity, the library district, and the library district would assume that liability. I think in the initial phases of the discussion back in 2018, there was some concern because that is that's probably a $5 million liability that you assume. Right. But, in doing some research and calling around, no entity, very few entities in the state of Colorado carry that in a balance of reserves. There's a certain amount that's required to carry, but it's not exorbitant. You don't have to suddenly have a $5 million reserve to cover the liability in the event that para went bankrupt.
Not like the post office. No. Claire?
So, if this fall the district is formed and the funding is voted on, that passes, how long does it take for the library district to actually have money in its coffers? Is there some time before that tax flows to the library district? Because I've seen some debate about how long the city would need to fund it. It sounds like there'd be like a year transition, but I'm just curious.
It is a one-year transition. At present, we are trying to meet the timeline for the county so that the district's money would begin flowing immediately. So the early payments on property tax begin as early as February. They really begin to flow at April. So if there was an successful Tabor election in 2022, money would begin to flow in February through April of 2023. Now, that's contingent upon a deadline that the county has, and I can't remember what the date is, maybe Janet does.
I don't remember the deadline, but the assessor has a.
It's June 30th. It's June 30th. So a lot of the issues have to be resolved by June 30th in order for that form of taxation to kick in. If it doesn't meet the June 30th date and it's still successful at a 2022 election, the money won't begin to flow until 2024.
Any other questions? I want to point out that the advocates have some handouts at the back. Kim has prepared an excellent handout. Kim's colleague has prepared an excellent handout. The Bar Association will have the recording on YouTube, so if you know interested parties who might want to view that, is that open to folks who aren't members of the bar? We're not sure.
Yes,
okay, yeah, great. And I thank the Boulder Bar Association for organizing this, and really want to thank our panelists for very informative discussion.